Okay, let's wrap this up in a discussion about, especially when we talk about sociological research, we of course have to talk about ethics. Clearly, the definition of research is we are conducting experiments involving human beings. So if you remember back to the very first lecture, I talked about the idea of taking a human baby and removing it from its parents and taking it to another culture. Of course, we'd never be able to do that. That's unethical. It's against the law. It violates many very important codes of behavior. And into that, clearly, sociology has very strong thoughts about the conditions under which we are going to conduct sociological research, and we call those, of course, ethics. So the American Sociological Association lays out, obviously, very strict and rigid standards. Some of them, just to summarize, obviously research has to be conducted in conditions of honesty and openness. Okay? Sociologists should, of course, not be conducting secret experiments, experiments that are, or research that is not available to be looked at, criticized, reviewed by the public. And clearly, when we talk about, and clearly Max Weber, who we talked about in the our earlier part of the module, laid out a lot of the standards by which research should be conducted, and clearly some of the things that he said was that research should be non-biased. In other words, sociologists should not be trying to prove one thing or another or reach conclusions that they are comfortable with or that in any way benefit themselves personally. So when we talk about it being value-free and bias-free, we're talking about absolutely no falsification of the results. The example I just gave you, we may spend years conducting research and then finding out that our hypothesis is incorrect. We are not going to take steps in any way to try to invalidate our research just to make our hypothesis come out the way that we thought it was going to. Also, clearly, because we're talking about human beings here, it needs to be stated that there will be no harm to subjects that we're conducting research on. There have been some, unfortunately, very infamous events in which people were, for one reason or another, their identities and or reputations were damaged by poorly conducted sociological research. Clearly, as sociologists, we are always mindful of the effect we have on individuals and their lives when we include them in sociological research. So clearly, two of the high standards that we use to try to guarantee that no harm will come to any people by the facilitation of sociological research, clearly informed consent. Wherever possible, we're going to try to make sure that people who are participating in sociological research know that they are. Clearly, like I said, in an example that I gave earlier, such as Elijah Anderson and the research that he did in a bar, it's not always possible to achieve informed consent, at least maybe not while the experiment's running. In those cases, then, the second standard is anonymity. So we are going to guarantee that the identities of the people that we're studying are in no way compromised or released to the public, that the people who are part of the study, again, if we talk about the sex offender study I was doing, I would probably, and if I was a person who was going to be a participant in that study, want to make sure that both of these are achieved, that the people know that they are participating in a research study and that their identities are going to be protected. So once again, Max Weber definitely talked about the standards of sociological research, that it be value-free, that it be free from any bias. Clearly, he also talked about two very high standards. One is a measure of objectivity, to be able to say that research is being done completely free from bias, without any personal gain or benefit. Also, that research should be highly replicative. In other words, a high level of replication. That another researcher should be able to come along and do your research again and achieve very similar results. That is one of the measures of good research. When I mentioned earlier in the module, Emil Durkheim in his study of suicide, one of the reasons that is such a classic piece of sociological research is that to this day, almost 200 years later, people are still conducting that research and coming up with almost the exact same results that Durkheim did. That's a high level of replication. So in other words, if somebody else can do your research and come up with very similar results, that is a good sign of excellent research. Okay, in the next module, we will be discussing culture.